it's Leela, the proud poly kinky queer slut. Today's episode is going to be something a little bit different. I've received a request for a longer form episode, and I've decided that kind of counterpoint to what a lot of my favorite podcasts have done. A lot of my favorite podcasts have the longer episodes and then have kind of special mini episodes. Well, I'm going to do special long form episodes, and I'm going to do them when people ask for them. So if you want one, just ask. If there's anything I talk about that you'd like me to go into more detail on, then just ask, and I'd be happy to put together a long form episode on that topic. So this particular topic, someone had asked in response to the episode about shame and being shameless, that I'd love to hear more about your journey into living authentically and really owning who you are. And in the conversation around this, what this individual would really like to hear is more of my backstory and more of how I came to live shamelessly. So I'll be going into that for you all in this longer form podcast/blog. So hope you enjoy it. So first, some content warnings. I have learned over my life that hearing about my childhood, hearing about my origin story, as it were, is triggering to a lot of people, and rightfully so, because I came from a pretty bad place. So if you are sensitive to particular topics having to do with child abuse, with manipulation, with growing up in poverty, specifically with incest and child sexual abuse, with child rape, if you have triggers around any of those things, if hearing those words impacts you in a way that is challenging for you, then I'd encourage you to skip this episode, or at least skip the first half of it, because it's an important part of understanding where I come from and answering that question. But it is difficult to hear, and it's absolutely valid to have sensitivity around that and to not want to hear that. As a matter of fact, part of what I do to manage my PTSD is to manage certain intake of certain kinds of media, etc., because it can be triggering if you have certain conditions to hear about this stuff. So no judgment. Please know that I do not take it personally at all if this is one that you want to skip, and very, very happy to accommodate that. So please take care of yourself first, and know that going forward from this point on in this episode, there will be very frank discussions about very difficult topics. And if you're in for that, please plow through. But if not, know that you are seen and validated, and it's absolutely okay to just say, no, this episode's not for me, and to skip it. So my journey, like everyone's journey, starts with our childhood. And I do think that while there are several horrible parts of my childhood, it did teach me some things, gave me a leg up in a few ways when it came to authentic living. So I'm going to start with some things that are going to be hard to hear that are having to do with where I come from. So I'm the oldest of 5 children in my family of origin. My father had a 3rd grade reading level, barely made it through high school education, had a borderline personality disorder diagnosed later in life, but more importantly, he was a serial child rapist. And he sexually assaulted all of his kids from very early ages, including me. And I was, as a child, as a toddler, I was sexually assaulted by my father, and later by other family members as well, violent sexual assault. I was not beaten except in a few episodes of truly violent sexual assault. I was manipulated, and I was taught that my family was a good, loving family. I was taught that my family was wonderful in spite of all of these horrible things. So I also had the experience of, being fairly young, young, but 7, 8 years old, and feeling the love of my parent being taken away because I became a harder child to molest than my younger siblings. And I had repressed memories. So a lot of this stuff I know because I've worked through it. And a lot of my trauma that I experienced was at an age where childhood amnesia and repressed memories kind of worked in concert. So PTSD has been something I've been living with my entire life. Also, my mother was, she did her very best. I truly, honestly believe my mother did her very best. But my mother came from a place where my childhood looked great compared to her childhood. She had, multiple, just lots of physical abuse, lots of sexual abuse, lots of multiple abusers in her family, um, where she was frankly used horribly in her life, and I really, and also, other people in my life, like when I was coming of age, I realized that every single one of my female role models in my family of origin had been the victim of some form of sexual assault. Every single one. Um, and the men were blustery, and men and women both, but mostly the men. Scare tactics, lots of fear. Um, I was not frequently beaten as a child, but I was frequently screamed at, yelled at. And I was the oldest of five, so I had to take care of my younger siblings. Five kids born in 7 years. So I had to be responsible. And that was very much my obligation to do, to step up and be responsible. Um, so coming from that, coming from that place, a lot of my wires were crossed, were backwards. And today I still refer to that as opposite land, where what I think and feel to be true is the opposite of what is true. My brain also did what a healthy brain does in that situation. And it repressed a lot of the memories, as I mentioned, but also found ways to find the love and affection that I needed where I could get it. Um, Found ways to protect me from the worst. And I developed things like, as a kid, I loved the monsters, the vampires, the werewolves, those kind of things. Because I was a kid scared lying in my bed of, like, scared in the cold, because we were very poor. We were never homeless, but we were frequently had power shut off. There'd be the times when there were only spaghetti to live on, spaghetti and pancake mix to live on for a period of time before the next check would come in. Um, and when the money would come in, we would feel there would be the happiness, there would be the splurge, there would be the high, but then there would be the lows. And there was also all the stigma of being that family. That was not so easy. Also, my parents, oh my goodness, yes, the fear. So they parented by fear. So come around the block, this is a quiet street. If I'd ride around the block too fast, my parents would be like, "You're gonna get hit by a semi truck." And a lot of the way that they controlled us to not speak out about the abuse in my family was by telling us that we would be taken away and sent to foster homes. When we knew, in that society, in that community, I knew the kids who had spent time in foster care. And not all foster care is bad by any means, but the examples that my family surrounded me with were examples that were horrible, that were abusive, that were more abusive than what I was in. And frankly, we were scared by the threat that we would be taken away if the authorities or the more normal people would find out about what was going on. And it wasn't explicit. It wasn't like, don't tell them or else, but it was in all of the conversation, like, oh gosh, did you hear what happened to this person who falsely accused their parent of sexual assault, and then they got taken away and never got to see any of their family ever again. Those kind of stories. So I come from that backdrop. Lots of fear, lots of bad stuff. And when I got to middle school, so sixth grade, so I would have been about 11 years old, 12 years old, 12 years old-ish. My father was actually on trial in our small little town for sexual assault against a child. And I wasn't supposed to know about it, but of course I did, because kids are cruel. My sister got the kids who would step on the back of her heels and throw things at her and say, "Oh, go run home to daddy. Oh, no way, you can't, because he'll molest you." That kind of thing. I did not get that because I was a straight A student. I was blessed with that. This is not something that I take personal credit for. I did work hard, but I also am that particular kind of smart that the teachers look for. I follow directions well, And my apparently normal self, even at that age, and for those of you who don't know, an apparently normal self is the person you project to the world, especially when you come from a place of trauma and abnormality, that says, I'm fine, everything's good, everything's wonderful. Um, my apparently normal self has always been very strong. And that has been something that has been one of my biggest strengths. And I credit that as being one of those things that has helped get me out of that situation. Um, but but my sister, my younger siblings, they got it worse. At that point, I wasn't consciously aware that my other siblings had been victims of sexual assault. I found out around that age that my sister had been. I think I knew, but I think that was one of the things I really had to block. That I didn't know. I didn't need to consciously know. And at that age, there were a lot of things that I didn't consciously know because my brain was protecting me from them. But the fact that my father was on trial, the fact that this was a thing I was encountering in school, created a situation where I had to look at it. I had to look at what had happened to me. And the memories of what had happened to me started really bubbling up to the forefront. And I had conversations with friends about it. By the time I was 14, I realized that I hated myself, that I hated all of the things about me. And that was because I was making decisions to be performative, to let that apparently normal self, that what I thought everybody wanted of me, I was doing those things, and that was what I hated. And I distinctly remember being for about 14 years old and writing poetry to myself and crying, just crying and crying and crying. My life has involved a lot of crying, but crying and crying and crying, and this self-loathing that was so palpable. And I decided at that point that I could not keep living with that. That my choices were die or stop hating myself. And that's when I really started practicing following the compass voice, following my inner self voice, doing what I thought was right, and trusting myself above everyone else because everyone around me was telling me the wrong things. Everyone around me was telling me the wrong things to do. So that was really where my journey started, with that decision that I was going to start following my path, my voice, that I was going to make the decisions that made me hate myself less. And I didn't realize at the time, but that like these words around it. But now looking back on it, I really see that that's when I started practicing that. And I use the word practice very intentionally because we do not get there by just deciding to change. Everything we do is a practice. It's a skill you have to hone. You don't just decide one day, I'm going to be my authentic self and know how to do it. You have to practice. You have to really, really practice and try and fail and then try again and fail and then try again. So in those early years around, middle school, I would, middle school, freshman year of high school, I would try to, like, I would tell a friend about having been assaulted by my father, or just say, no, he's guilty. And then I would crash and burn and spend a week really trying to be okay. And then I would just try again. And it wasn't like a big thing. A lot of it was in the little things, like, in this situation, what am I going to say? And I would try to say the thing that was most authentic. And then I would feel through that. Also, around this time, I realized that my instincts were kind of flip-flopped. Like, what I was taught was my instinct was not actually my instinct. And that this opposite land, this brainwashing that I'd experienced was really kind of twisted. And I didn't trust my heart, my gut. Like, there was this sense of I would do something and it would either feel more good for me and more aligned with myself, even if it was terrifying, than if I'd done the other thing. But it was very vague and very scary. And whenever I stopped and was like, no, I'm just gonna go off my gut, do what my gut says to do. Well, my gut was wrong because I'd been conditioned badly. So my gut would say, no, I need to be nice to everybody. And that was the wrong choice. Or my gut would say, no, hold back, don't do that. And like, that was the wrong choice. So I started realizing that if I followed my gut, it was the wrong choice, and it wasn't consistent with this feeling of of feeling more authentically like integrated with myself. So I started doing the opposite of what my gut said and doing what my brain said. And a lot of what the path I set myself on at that point was the path of if I go to school, if I go to college, if I do well in school and go to college, then I will get my way out, because that's what everything said. That's what all of the media said, was like, you want to get yourself out of poverty? Biggest trope in the world is go to college and get out of your small town. So that's what I set my path on doing. Um, yeah, so that's how I got started on this journey in like the middle school age. So then I went to high school. So I was 15, freshman in high school, small town, and um, my sexual awakening was a very empowering experience for me. Also debate club. I mean, honestly, geek culture. I found geek culture. And freshman year of high school is when I found people who were really excited about talking about philosophy. So in middle school, I had friends where we talked politics. But in high school, we talked philosophy. We talked Marx, Hume, all of them, Descartes, um, really dove into the books and dove into understanding ethical philosophy and political philosophy in a big way at like 15, 16 years old. So that element was so psychologically gratifying, but it also gave me an avenue for real exploration of comparative religions, of political theories, of all of these like kind of higher echelon things, like big picture items, to function in as a backdrop, and expanded my world to beyond my little town. Um, at home, my father had a heart attack and a quadruple bypass. My parents were getting divorced, but then separating. They hadn't really gotten married, but that's a whole other thing. But they were separating, but I didn't know about it. But then ultimately ended up not separating. But that's resulted in us moving after my freshman year to a much larger school, where there were 800 students, and an even wider group of people to get intellectual with. And really, really dive into that philosophy. It was wonderful finding that group of people, both at my original school and then at the larger school I went to. Also, my family moved from a larger house into a much smaller house. My brother, who had been allowed to drop out of the third grade, I was the advocate for him, and I was failing. And I know now that I didn't have the power to succeed. I had the illusion of power, but I didn't have actual power. But my parents took my brother out of school in the third grade, and at about that time, my youngest brother, who was 7 years younger than me, and he never went back. And he was homeschooled by my abusive father, and so that was going on, kind of as a counterpoint at home to all of this breaking out in the rest of my life. So I was 15, and I was loving this debate club thing, loving these intellectual people. Found myself a bad boy to have a crush on, of course, as a girl is wont to do. And that relationship, that changed my life in a lot of ways. It was the start of finding power. And I found healing through my romantic relationships from a pretty young age. So classic situation where, first love catastrophe over miscommunication, where I fell madly in love with this guy. I made out with him in the high school library. My body was just raring to go because I am a born slut, and didn't end up actually having sex, but basically. But then he was in love with another friend of mine, and it was like this whole thing that blew up. But what I learned from him is that I was smarter than the people around me, stronger than the people around me, and my sexuality was beautiful. That my sexuality was not something to be ashamed of, was not something I had to hide, and that it was beautiful. And I could tell him, no, my father is guilty. I am a victim of sexual assault. And he was like, yeah, that doesn't matter to me one little bit. You're a brilliant person. You need to get the fuck out of this town. And I really, really, really appreciated him for that. That made all the difference to be able to be honest about where I had come from and about the thing I was most ashamed of was being a victim of sexual assault, of having my father be a monster. I felt like I was a monster. I felt like that was part of me. I was so deeply ashamed of of being his daughter and of having been abused. And now I recognized even more deeply of the ways that I had taken affection from that as a small child being molested was how my father showed love for me, and that was something I wanted deeply, and I felt like I was so broken because of that. And to have this person right at the moment where, like, literally first kiss, kind of really sexual awakening, kind of first kiss, like first real adult feelings of sexual desire in my body, to have that person acknowledge and be okay with the fact that I was a victim, and to not feel that that defined me was really, really great. It meant the world to me. Um, and then, of course, it was complicated. Turned out he was an asshole, but you know what? It's got me on the right track. And um, throughout high school, my next boyfriend was wonderful. To this day, one of the sweetest humans I've ever met. And I got my car at 16, and we would drive to the library, and he would look up his gaming books, his books on role play games, and while I would go to the self help section and look up things on healing, self help, PTSD, and really just started doing that work on my own at the same time that we were just really exploring what it was to love each other and to be in a relationship, and finding that sense of being loved outside of my family of origin really started to help me find a foundation. And at this point, I did not realize I was queer. I did not realize I was poly. I just knew that sexual energy. I did kind of know I was slutty. I um, I was very, very careful to never have penetrative sex because I didn't want to get pregnant. Um, but I really enjoyed all of the sexual exploration. So I was coming to understand that I was a slutty girl. But that was okay because I was only slutty with my boyfriend. Such a ridiculous thing now, but that really gave me a sense of healing and a sense of path forward on my journey. And when we broke up, it was the most amicable breakup. It was we both just kind of acknowledged that it wasn't a long-term thing and it wasn't working for us. And then we spent a beautiful night in his treehouse in the candlelight making love, and parted ways. And it was sad, but it was really healing for me. So those early, I was also hopelessly in love with my best friend, who also turned out to be a jackass. But he was another person where I told him I cared about him. I told him I had feelings for him, and he was just like, "Yeah, I don't feel the same way for you, but I'm still here. But I still care about you. I still want you in my life. Like, you're still my close friend." So um, I think those positive experiences and relationships gave me some strength that I needed, some reassurance from outside my family that I needed, and allowed me to really step into the next phase of my life where I got out of high school and went to college and had a complete nervous breakdown. So at 19, I totally freaked out. I had a epistemological crisis where I pushed myself too hard, went to college too hard, transferred in as a junior to the UW with a double major in philosophy and psychology, or philosophy and social science, or political science. Sorry, philosophy and political science, and just balls to the wall through myself at academics and burnt myself out hard, and then crashed. And then I spent about 9 months living with my parents, being nocturnal, and went deep into religious philosophy, deep into all of the ethical philosophies to find my true north, to find my compass, and realized at that point that my foundational belief is that I believe I cannot know anything. I believe that I do not know anything and that I will never know anything because epistemology, because I just can never um, have the capability. That me as a human, I can never really have the capability to know anything. So I'm going to take a moment to really dive into this core belief of knowing nothing. Um, so I mentioned that I was really into philosophy and that I had this nervous breakdown in the first year of college. So I transferred into UW as a junior, and one of the first classes I took was epistemology, which is the philosophy of knowledge. And the core question of that class is, how do we know anything? How do you know literally anything? This is the class that broke my brain. So um, the core premise here is that knowledge is a justified true belief, meaning it's something that you believe, something that you think is true, that it is actually true. So it is actually true in the external world, and that you have a justifiable reason for believing it to be true. This is a very, I don't know that I can in short form really describe that, give this justice, but it was a 3-month course that I went through on this that really got to me. But really what it comes down to is justification. How do I know that what I am perceiving is actually external reality? There's a very simple metaphor used in this that is color. So right, like I see my hand as a specific color, but physics teaches me that what I'm actually seeing are the reflected photons that are not absorbed by my hand. And that's why I see my hand as the color it is, because it's rejecting those particular photons. And we know that different animals see things differently. So we know our perceptions are different. Also, coming from the background that I had described to you with my family and the brainwashing and the abuse, I had seen firsthand so clearly that my mother perceived things differently than how that actually happened. That she could feel like she really knew something that I had observed happened completely differently. Same with my father. So I had seen this happen in practice. And when I asked myself the question, what makes me different? How can I actually know? The answer I came up with was I can't. And that's what threw me into the spiral. That's what threw me off a cliff, is that I realized that I did not know what was real. This was also right around the time when movies like The Matrix were coming out, and Fight Club, and it really seemed that this was all culturally, like, just pointed at me, as in, like, you do not know that you're not a brain in a jar. You just don't know. You don't have any knowledge of that. And so I took time. I really took time and let myself rest, let myself fall apart. Unfortunately, I was in the house with my parents, with my family, and the reason I became nocturnal is that I avoided them as much as I possibly could, so that I could just take the space to really work this out. This is also when I learned to meditate, and came to a comfort that I won't know, that I don't know, that I don't know. And so I came up with what I consider my operational beliefs, the things that are going to be the premises on which I operate in this world, so that I don't go completely mad, but that I have to be subject to change. They have to be subject to change because I don't know. I'm limited by my humanity, and that's okay. And I developed that comfort around that at around 19 years old, that's okay. And so that's how I proceed through life now. And I think it's helpful in being authentic, in being shameless, in following that compass, that it's okay to be wrong. And being wrong, even about one of those fundamental things that lets me look at what reality actually is, even if I'm wrong about something that I hold in my core to be true, that's okay. It doesn't change who I am, because ultimately I know that I can be wrong. I am fallible. and being proven wrong does not change who I am. I think that's a big difference between me and a lot of people, and I think that's something that has allowed me to move forward in the world with more flexibility and versatility than some others might be able to, because you if I learn that something, I'm trying to think of an example. So, for example, basic physics, right? So, the understanding that this is the only universe that exists. If I learn there's another universe that exists, okay, great, there is. I'm wrong, but more practically, this comes down to like know better, do better, right? So when I learn a better way to do things, I'm more capable of saying, okay, I did the best that I could then. Now I'm going to pivot and change and do better. That's a part of my operating practice that has been part of that practice from a very young age. And that really helps me be resilient to pressures to be inauthentic. So after I took the 9 months to just crash, I went back to college. I went to Evergreen State College, and had a wonderful experience there. Met some really great people. Um, Experienced for the first time really that liberal counterculture that gave me some space to expand my horizons. I came out as bisexual when I was 19 in high school, or just after high school, and that was really no big deal. Nobody freaked out about it in any way. It was kind of a non-issue except for fetishizing and erasure. But in college, I really got to experience some of that, and really be openly attracted to women and men and have that be fine. I did not slut it up in college, but I met good people. Um, and then I had to get money because I was out of money. So I ended up leaving college for a while and started my professional career. And that's when I met my wife, who then was a guy working in the mailroom while I was an administrative assistant. And that relationship changed my life. That relationship gave me a foundation. So I have a really good friend who younger got married recently, and when I asked them why they wanted to get married, not why they loved their spouse, but why they wanted to get married, it was because they wanted to make their spouse their primary family, their core family. And that's what I really feel like I did when I met my spouse. That person became my family. They became my root. They became my safety. And at this point, I was still laboring under the delusion that my family was generally a good family. It just happened to have this poison of this abusive person in it. Um, that's something I've disabused of now. But at the time, at 21 years old, I really believed that. I believed my family was good people, except for this one problem, and that at the core they were a loving family. And I was still subject to a lot of that brainwashing about my family um, being generally good for me, and especially my mother, my sister, my brothers, um, certain aunts and uncles. Um, so it took me, and I am still kind of ashamed of this. It took me so long, but I try to forgive myself because it it was so very damaging, my childhood, and it really took me getting married to feel that sense of safety, and I to confront it really. And I think what really did it was that the ritual of marriage and the way that that was contextualized for me growing up. When a woman gets married, her focus shifts to her new family. And I didn't realize the degree to which I'd internalized that message, but I had. I really strongly had internalized that message that marriage meant starting your life. And, which is funny because, you wouldn't have thought that that would be the case, but it was for me. So, so when I got married, which was 5 years after I'd met my spouse, so right about actually, I don't think, well, yeah, it was right after the wedding. So, um, I was finally brave enough to really confront things. So I had already told my sister about the abuse that I'd suffered. I knew she was also a survivor. I wrote a letter at that point, just after my wedding, to my entire family, like siblings, parents, aunts, uncles, cousins. At that point, I did also know that some of my cousins were victims of abuse. And I had been going to therapy for about a year. Really, so that was a hypnotherapist. I won't say it was the best therapy I've ever had, but it was therapy, and it got me started in that direction. And as I mentioned, I'd also been doing a lot of self help around PTSD for quite a while at that point. Um, but I laid it out. That short letter, it was 2 pages, and it said that I was the victim of sexual assault as a kid, that I was a person that I knew that I wasn't the only victim in the family. I knew my father was not the only abuser in the family, and I sent it to everybody. So they got it in the mail, and it included a basic code of conduct that basic rule boundary. Now I have the vocabulary to say it included a boundary that I was setting, that I was not going to interact with them in any setting where my father was there, and that I wasn't going to have any relationship with anyone who continued to support my father, the known abuser, or any other known abuser in our family. Um, what followed was nearly a decade of slowly losing everyone. So as a child, I was brainwashed with the fear that if I ever talked about the darker side of what I had grown up with, that was going to cost me everyone in my life, that I would lose everyone. And I did lose everyone. But the ironic thing is that they didn't go away. I had to let them go. I had to push them each away. I had to say goodbye to every single one of them for my own good. And I did it for my own good. But I had to let them all go, all of them, because ultimately it was the only way that I could break that cycle of abuse. It was the only way that I could break that pattern. And it was horribly painful. It was awful. So my father, obviously, that was an easier one. I just cut him. After I sent the letter, I had my siblings over to tell them. After I did mail, before they received it, I had my siblings over to let them know what I'd done, so that they were braced for it, especially since my brothers were still living with my father at that time. And that's when I found out that at least 2 of my brothers, I think all of them, were also sexually assaulted by the same man, and that we'd all suffered abuse at multiple people's hands, or at least I had, and they were all coming into it at their different times. I invited my youngest brother to live with me, tried to help him, was unable to help him. I really, really did my all. I bought my mom a place to live so that she could leave my dad. None of it worked. My mom went back. My father died in his easy chair, surrounded by, living with 2 to 3 of his kids. And my mother's still living, and based on the little snippets I've heard, despite my best efforts to avoid any contact, things are still continuing to be very, very dramatic over there, with lots of horrible things happening to them. And I'm doing my best to not have anything at all to do with that. And it's hard. It's really hard, and it hurt really bad. But I've built myself a family now that is a good family, like healthy family. And it's wonderful. Like, my family now is wonderful. But there will always be a pit in my heart. There will always be a pit in my heart for the people I left. Always. You don't stop loving people. In my experience, you never stop loving people. And once you fall in love with somebody, once you love somebody, you love them forever. But that doesn't mean that you have them in your life, because there are a lot of people that I love who are not worthy of being in my life, and sometimes through no fault of their own. They're just not at a place where they're healthy for me, or where I'm healthy for them. And especially, I think, when you come from a place where you are traumatically involved in the same things with people, like my siblings and I growing up in the same traumatic household, being around each other is a trigger. And I mean that word in the PTSD sense. It's triggering to even talk to each other, to even see pictures of each other, because of the trauma we experienced as children. So it's best that we just not interact. It's best that we just not be together. And that hurts, but that's okay. So, this is a good time to go into more why pain has saved me and how pain has saved me. So, all of these experiences, that I've described so far of opening myself up, of being the one who says something, of letting go of my family, they've all hurt like a motherfucker. They suck. It hurts so bad. Um, but I have learned that pain is good for me. I have learned that, well, there are kinds of pain that are good for you. There are kinds of pains that are good for you. There are kinds of pains that are bad for you. And you can find it with the compass, with that it's following your heart feeling. Um, you can find it by stopping and evaluating, does this feel like me on the other side, or does this feel less like me on the other side? And it's case by case, but like that's how you kind of do it, series of experiments. But in general, I have never regretted doing the hard thing, doing the hard, brave, scary thing. um, Pretty much every single time, almost every single time, I've come out the other side stronger, braver, healthier, and more healed than when I started. Um, so this is not a pretty process. This is an ugly, ugly process. So how that looks for me, in at how this looked for me around that time, where I was dealing with this like letting go of my whole family situation. Um, and also at this time I was also going to really good therapy, really good therapy. And also, this time being like my late 20s, going to really good therapy, also working my ass off. Like seriously, I was building my career. I was working my ass off. I was working 40 to 60 hours a week. I was really pushing to build that financial security. And we just got our first condo. um, we it was a time when being secure meant having security of my own. But so what this would look like is, so I would encounter something on TV that was triggering, or I would have all these like nervous reactions, and I would find myself just lying in bed crying for a couple hours. And then I would push through, and I'd come out and think about why that got me down. And then I'd get up and go to work the next day and put on my apparently normal self, and yeah, do what, compartmentalize. Lots of compartmentalizing going on at that stage in my life. I now recognize it as putting things on the shelf and then taking things off the shelf to look at them, and then putting them back on the shelf. But I had this like my therapist led me through having this imaginary vault, this like giant vault where I could just put stuff away. Um, but what would happen a lot were these things like, I had a conversation with my mother where my mother told me that she was moving back in with my dad, and then a conversation the next day while I was driving home from work where I told her that I could never talk to her anymore, because that I needed her out of my life, because because I couldn't have that influence in my life. And then I would go home and I would crawl into bed and cry hysterically, just unable to get out of bed. For that particular one was about 3 days where I literally couldn't get out of bed. My wife would bring me food, would help make sure I had Harry Potter movies rolling on a loop. So, you know, folks are confused about why I still support the Harry Potter franchise, even though J.K. Rowling can just go suck an egg. And it's because it was so meaningful to me in that period of my life that I mean, I'm separating the art from the artist, because it was so meaningful for me to be able to put on just distraction video about somebody who came from a place that was horrible and was doing these wonderful things. And so many little messages like, it's not the ways that you're alike, it's the ways that you're different. Things like that really resonated and saved me. But it was painful and horrible. And then I'd go to therapy and I'd work through it. And every therapy session I'd leave crying. But through that, I looked at it. I confronted things. Repressed memories came up. And over time, it got better. over time, it got better and better and better. And also, right towards the end of that period of my life, like in my late 30s, that's when I discovered the works of Brene Brown. And I was already heading this way with my therapist, but um, towards the end of letting go of my family, I and really embracing this like independence and coming to understand that my strength was really coming from a place that was inside me and that was feeling stronger, feeling the process of separation from this bad place I came from, making me into a stronger person. And the more authentic I was becoming, the stronger I was becoming. Towards the end of really feeling that is when I really encountered Brene Brown's messaging and the book Daring Greatly, and this notion just snapped into place in my head so quick that because I was ready for it. I was ready for this message, and it's the core message that if you want to be happy, you have to practice being happy. You have to actually allow yourself to be happy, and there are some so key things in this narrative, right? So, one, shamelessness. I was raised in a culture where we were taught to be ashamed of ourselves, ashamed of where we come from, that I'm wrong, I'm bad, there's something bad about me. And finding that message really allowed me to start the practice in a different way of saying, no, if I ever think that, if I ever think that this is something that is bad about me, that is wrong. That is opposite land. That is not true. And so then that was Brandon Sanderson's latest Stormlight Archives book calls Warrior Thoughts. I love that series too. Warrior Thoughts. So whenever I'd start to feel something that was self-deprecating, that was, and I still do this, that is, you're not good enough. Then the warrior thought comes in that's like, boom, no, that is an opposite land thought. That is a not true thought, because you might have made mistakes, but you are not bad. You are good. You are wonderful just the way you are. And that's just a powerful way to interrupt that cycle. I also learned some really good management techniques for my PTSD. Grounding yourself in reality in a big way. That I started writing songs for myself. I started there's this exercise, simple exercise, it's called 5 Things, where if you start to feel like your emotions are not aligned with your reality, then you look around, and I'll do it right now. I name 5 things I see. I see my pride flag. I see my dragon skull. I see the globe. I see the books. I see the bookshelf. I hear my voice. I hear my knuckles on the wood. I hear an airplane in the distance outside. And then, and I feel my fingers. I feel my coffee cup in my fingers. I feel my toes rubbing together. I feel my clothes sitting on my shoulders. And then you start with 5, and then you do 4, and then 3 and 2 and 1. And then by the time you're done, you're recalibrated to now, which has been a really helpful PTSD calming technique. And yeah, also a few other nuggets of wisdom from Brene Brown and the other things I encountered in that particular phase of my life that have really stuck with me. Practicing gratitude. Happy people practice gratitude. And that doesn't mean that you're constantly thanking everybody for everything. But it does mean that taking the moment to appreciate and acknowledge what you're grateful for. And this is one of those things where the religious tradition of prayer serves this function. But as a person who rejected faith, I found myself without an outlet for this. So taking the moment to stop and just pray, thankfully, not to anyone, but just to be like, I am thankful for my home, for my family, for at that point it was just my wife, but thankful for my job, thankful for my community, thankful for that really fun show I went to last night. And that makes a big difference. Also, the idea of marble jar friends. So this is a concept that when you build connections with people, the people gain their trust or you lose trust, like a teacher with a marble jar in the classroom. So a marble jar is like, if everybody's behaving well, you put a few marbles in. If people misbehave, you take a few marbles out. So that's really how connection's built. And is through this marble jar approach where you build long-term trust. And it doesn't mean that your friends aren't going to hurt you sometimes, but it's about the marble jar. And at the point where that marble jar is empty, that's the point where it's time to let somebody go. Um, but different people get to different levels in that marble jar, and that's how it should be. That's that concept I now recognize later evolved into my relationship anarchy, and it was really the roots of understanding that drive in myself. Um, Also, at this particular point in my life, I had my makeup buddy friends, so I was mostly monogamous. But I had the occasional friends that I could make out with, and my wife knew about that, and that was fine. And I was able to be more openly bisexual for the first time in my life because frankly, up to that point, dealing with the trauma and letting go of my family had been the more pressing issue. And so now, at that point in my late 20s, I could really lean into my what I now know as my polyness more and be more open about like just my feelings of being very open about wanting sexual friendships and talk to that a lot. I was still in monogamy. I still didn't have good examples of poly in my life, but I was able to really find power in connecting with people by talking about those things. Also, during this period of my life was when I found Burning Man, and Burning Man taught me that life without PTSD was possible, because for the first time in my life I experienced life without PTSD. And it was because, and I don't know that Burning Man is this for everybody. Certainly, I think it's a different experience around that time when I went than it is now. But it taught me for the first time that you could exist without worrying about what other people think of you at all. Just not even care what anybody else thinks of you. It was the first time I'd experienced that. And that was empowering in a huge way. Huge. Talk about like embracing authenticity. That was just a major way to embrace authenticity, was leaning into Burning Man. So Burning Man for me was a particular focal experience. And I went 4 times. I went twice with my wife, and then twice by myself, over a period of 10 years. So 2008 through 2018. And also bridging the gap between not having kids and having kids and being a new mother. And everyone experiences Burning Man differently. Also, I do not think Burning Man is the only place where you can have this experience. It was my place for this experience, but I do think that it's possible to find this in a lot of different places and venues, especially now. It's a lot easier now than it was circa 2008 to find these kind of environments. But for me, Burning Man was just this amazing experience, just experientially. But it breaks you down, makes you exhausted, especially if you do it the way that that most people were at that point, where you're working your ass off to bring whatever the magnificence to the desert. So it breaks you down to the point where you are your worst air quotes self. The you that you are when you haven't had enough sleep, when you've been working your ass off, when you're in a climate that's against you, where you really have no more spoons to give. You're empty. And then it takes you in that state and then releases you into this playground of art and experience that is unlike anything else. So my experience was that I went out into the world like that and found that instead of being told to be something else, people were like, fuck yes, you're awesome, come on in, you do you, and just so enthusiastically like encouraging of letting all of the social barriers drop, all of them, all the constructs of what I was supposed to be, boom, fell away. And that really started my practice of finding those spaces, because it was life-changing. My PTSD was gone. I just didn't have it anymore while I was at Burning Man. It came back after, of course, but it was, I got to experience what that was like to just not have that. I also think that there are I just had enculturated all these ideas of what I had to be that were eating me alive. And I didn't even notice because I've just always been in it. So Burning Man allowed me to shrug that off and say, okay, well, who am I? What do I want to do? Also, the way that I burn is not like a lot of people do. I strike off on my own. I love being on my own and I just go. And so I didn't stick with the pack because I learned that that's not me. Um, and there were key lessons that I just found at the right moments because I was open to them. Like, be your whole self. Don't compartmentalize. Just be your whole self, all of you. That I found at the burn where I had just had my daughter and I was struggling with this idea of like compartmentalizing mommy life with the rest of my life. And I realized I didn't have to. So, openness to those things and embracing this idea of being who you are in entirely. So I brought that back from Burning Man, and I also brought back a lot of the experience of the art and a lot of the experience of just like um, knowing myself better from exploring those experiences and having those conversations with people and gravitating towards the art that I liked, the things that I liked. And that's also when I really first started to see the degree to which I had unconsciously sublimated my desires for those of my spouse. Um, just out of that drive for safety and security and new connection to family and all of those insecurities that I had been raised with. And so I started actively countering that. And that really set me on the path towards more of this brave opening up about being poly, kinky, queer, all of those things. Because I started actively countering normal because of Burning Man. Matter of fact, a big part of why my spouse and I live in Portland, Oregon is because it embodies that core cultural feeling of everyone being authentic as a communal value better than anywhere else we've ever experienced in our lives. And so that was an intentional choice. So this essentially brings us up to my 30s. Um, Around this time in my career, I was still working on corporate ladder stuff, like really focused on being good at my job. But also, my spouse and I were realizing that we needed our next big thing. That I'd reached a place where my PTSD was not cured, but good. Um, the attacks were manageable. I was still dealing with a lot of with sick days, but where I was just horribly depressed and couldn't get out of bed. But they weren't so frequent that it was a problem in my life. Like it was a chronic condition, right? I was managing it, um, and we both wanted more. So we did what people do and decided to have kids, and that was amazing. Horrible, terrifying, but wonderful. As those of you who are parents out there know, having children is both the hardest and most wonderful experience that a person can possibly have. At least in my book, that's what it is. There were some specific things that happened around parenting that I just feel like are so core to this question of shameless living and authenticity. Um, so first, having your children forces you to think about how you want to be a parent. And for me, that meant really diving into what kind of parent I wanted to be. And my spouse and I, we threw out the rule book, meaning we threw out the book of what we had learned from our families of origin because we knew our families of origin had taught us things that we don't want to pass on. My family, there was nothing to pull from my family. There was nothing that I wanted to pull through. So that gave me a clean slate. So I researched. But also, I really thoughtfully brought into being a parent the kind of parent I wanted to be based on what I knew about psychology and based on everything that I had learned about childhood development, everything I knew about, and honestly, like I took classes. I did. I took classes, and Google will teach you how to be a good parent if you use it properly. Um, Becoming a mother terrified me. It did. And having children forced me to look at my traumas in a totally different way and myself in a totally different way. Starting with like the process of pregnancy and the toll it took on my body, the that real push pull give take experience of being a mother, giving birth, having these little parasites to take care of. We lovingly call them parasites when I was pregnant, because they were it's a symbiotic relationship, but they suck the life out of you, quite literally, and do permanent damage into your body in some ways. And you encounter the massive sexism in the history of medicine going through that process. To me, in a way I'd never experienced before. Like things like we don't even know what triggers labor. And I became much more radically feminist going through that process of labor, delivery, childbirth. Like people telling me not to eat cheese when all my body wanted was cheese. People, like all those things. And then having children and taking on the responsibility of not only teaching them what they need to know to navigate this world, but also seeing the world that is being left for them and really getting, having to confront that, having to look at that, having to really push for that. There was an importance there now to how I represent myself in the world, how I push myself in the world, what they see me doing, because I am their role model. They see what I do, and that's what they learn. So for me, that was 13 years ago now that I had my son, and a little over 13 and a half now. And then my daughter is now 12 years old, and I have been forced. Like, how do you live authentically? Well, when you make decisions, think about how your children are seeing you and whether that's a decision that you're proud of for your children to see or not. And whether you would want them to be making that same decision or a different decision. Because children learn more from what you do than from what you say. Children learn more. I mean, it's important to say the right things, obviously, but they learn from the model that you are, from the way that you put yourself forward. So if I wanted my kids to be authentic, if I wanted my kids to live their authentic truths, then they had to see me doing it. And point after point after point after point in raising them, I came to these moments where it was like, everything I've ever been taught tells me to go left, but the right decision is to go right, and I'm going to go right. I'm going to be brave. I'm going to just push through, because that's what I want my kids to see, and that's what's going to build the better world for them, where they can be more their authentic selves. So that I think is one of the biggest personal advantages of being a parent, is that they motivate you to do better. Also, they parrot back at you what you say and the lessons that they are taught. And if you can absorb that and learn from that, that is hugely empowering and will help you be shameless and will help you live by your own values. I'm minded of things that my daughter has said to me, like we were in the car and I was like, oh yeah, practice makes perfect. And she says to me, no, practice makes progress. And I was like, oh, right. Yes, of course, because the whole idea of practice makes perfect leads to this idea of needing to be perfect, of needing to be the best. But practice makes progress is so much more in line with the actual philosophy of just do better, just do your best, do good. Also, they encounter challenges in life that make you stop and empathize and be there for them. In a way that's truly selfless. I mean, we tell the stories jokingly about the time, lying or being in a pool of vomit while my baby is throwing up for the first time and so confused about what's going on with their body and scared because they've never had food come up out of their mouth before and they're terrified. And so just cuddling them as this warm vomit is going all over my body, checking my own comfort for the sake of providing that comfort to this tiny being that I'm taking care of. That changed my perception so much. And specifically in terms of my personal struggles and specifically in terms of my mental health and my PTSD and my journey towards my own authenticity, specific to just every person's journey in this moment of parenting. Um, I realized as a mother that for the first time, really truly in my heart, that I could not have helped my siblings. That I was, as a child, in my abusive family of origin, that I was being put in a position as like a a 5 to 15-year-old person to provide maternal nurturing and support, and that was impossible. That was just not even possible. And I think before then, I'd been told that wasn't possible. I'd been told that wasn't fair, but in my heart, I really felt like it should have been true. But having my own children and experiencing that from the perspective of mother drove it into my heart that that was impossible, that I was not at fault, that there was nothing I could have done to save, to protect any of them, because I was in fact also a child. And and being a mother, being the adult, being the guardian and caregiver and guide and teacher for my kids, being that comfort for my kids, um, it took a maturity and a sense of self to do that well that there was no way anyone could have when one is, 5 to 15 years old. It just doesn't exist. So that was super empowering. Another thing that I experienced, and keep in mind, along all this time, I was going through therapy, and not just therapy, but really my therapist and I were working at the cutting edge of PTSD therapies, where we were trying all the things. EMDR was a fairly popular therapy that was considered newer at that time. We were doing a lot of EMDR. And this therapist was a person with a ton of experience working with people with childhood trauma, and who I'd found specifically for that expertise. And so as my children were growing up, and still, this is still happening, absolutely. So as my children were growing up, I found myself revisiting all of the traumas that happened to me at those ages through the triggers of introduced by my children. So my children were themselves triggering because I would remember things about being that age that I didn't know, or that I hadn't looked at that way, or see it in a different way, or I couldn't avoid the trigger. And just the contrast in the ways that they were being raised, and the ways that they were like me, but also not like me, and just seeing the ways that I had been impacted by the trauma I had experienced in my youth. It was a completely different lens and unavoidable, and also often without having as much freedom to actually take the space to dive into that. So really, really grateful for my spouse through all of this time, because they made it so that I could take the space I needed to process those things and really work through stuff on my own and with my therapist. And it was just dramatically impactful. But it was a very different experience. So let me see if I can give an example of that. So for example, I knew that most of the truly traumatic things that had happened to me when I was between the ages of 2 and 7 years old. When I saw my children at 2, 3 years old, and what they were actually like at that age, and then having those flashback memories of the violence that I experienced, I really saw the degree to which there was a power differential there that was so much more vast than I realized when I was without children, looking back at those memories. And it really allowed me to see how weak the people who hurt me were, because they were taking advantage of such small people, such tiny, tiny people. And I had struggled a lot with my own helplessness. Well, prior to having kids, there was this sense in me that, like, I should have been able to do more. I should have done things differently. What happened to me was in some way my fault. I really should have been able to do better. There were things I could have done to change it. And I now know that that's a classic response because powerlessness is damaging to the brain. And so the brain makes you feel like you have more power than you do, because if you could have done something differently to have stopped it, then you can do something differently next time to stop it if it ever happens again. And that makes you feel more safe. Well, being a parent and be like looking at these things when my kids were that age that I was when I experienced that trauma, um, that changed my perspective so much, because I could see how weak I actually was when I was that victim. And I felt through that pain. That was a different kind of pain, but I was ready for it. I was ready to deal with it at that point. I had the tools to do it. Um, the brain has this beautiful way of leading us towards the healing we're ready for when we're ready for it. And I experienced that in spades as a mother. Each step I was ready. And I do worry about the impact on my kids of having a parent who's dealing with major psychological issues. But I also, I know that I'm role modeling for them what it is to heal. This world is full of trauma. This world is full of shit. I mean, you don't have to go far. I have built myself, my spouse and I have built ourselves this place of safety through working our asses off. I mean, making money, trying to do what we can to move ourselves into places of freedom, through cutting out my entire family, through limiting contact with V's family, with their family. It's something that has taken a lot of work, but we've done it, and we've created this bubble of safety in our world. But seeing what my kids go through, and my kids are well protected, but seeing the world, and even from their perspective of frankly advantaged kids who I've done my best to give them what I can in terms of awareness and tools, but watching what they go through in the world and seeing how the world treats them, and how the world is just generally, and how much badness there still is out there in the world, it can be crushing. It can be crushing. And I know that when my kids get out there in the world, whatever my kids encounter in the world, they are probably going to need therapy. And they're definitely going to have a few, every parent messes up, right? There are definitely ways that I've messed up. But my kids are going to have seen for their entire life a lived example of a person fighting and overcoming and living their truth despite pressures of society to do otherwise, in both of their parents. And I really think that's going to serve them better than having raised them in a different way. And that's one of those operational beliefs that I've got right now, that as much as I might worry about how my weaknesses will impact my kids, I think that seeing some of that and having age-appropriate visibility and more visibility into the process of working through than to the actual traumas themselves, I'm hopeful that will give them the tools that they need. And circling back to the question of how to live shamelessly and authentically, that is the number one thing that I'm trying to teach my kids. And you can only teach that through example. You can only teach that by living it. That is the only way. That's how one must teach, because otherwise you just end up with your kids repeating what you did. And if that's not a good motivator for change, I don't know what is. So now we fast forward to this time when I have my kids. My kids, age range, we're talking elementary school kind of ages for my kids. And a few wonderful things happened with this. So first off, prior to having my kids, I was dealing with so much that making friends, having a social life was not in my top priorities. And I was just happy to have the social life that came with my spouse and with their music, because they were in bands, and there was a lot of social life just kind of around that I could take advantage of. But building those close connections was not my priority. Um, Monogamy was wonderful for me at this stage in my life because I could really lean into my spouse, and that safety and comfort was massively important. Um, but this wonderful thing happened when I had kids, where first, I mean, it felt horrible at the time, but a lot of our kind of heteronormative monogamous culture, the way that my friends who were the guys saw me and treated me when I had babies was eye opening. They treated me so much different. Um, it was just, I was not prepared for it, to be honest. I kind of thought we were past that point. But talk about things that throw you into being more raging feminist. When the guys who were your makeout buddies suddenly don't want to like see your boob because you're nursing a baby, and start treating you like differently because now you're somebody's mother, that was so crazy eye opening to me, and frankly, pissed me off, and made me just feisty about like, no, mothers are freaking sexy. Shut it the fuck up. Just really powered me up about that. Um, Another thing that happened is that prior to that, my social life was really around my spouse. Well, when you have kids, you have to trade. You can't just do everything together anymore. And this is very, very challenging for the relationship itself, but it was wonderful for me as an individual because previously, I mean, my social life was around my spouse. And now, for the first time, I had to go out by myself as Leela and meet people. And so then my spouse would show up at our neighborhood pinball bar, and it'd be like, "Oh, you're Leela's partner." And that was the first time that had really happened to us. And so it really helped change the dynamic a little bit, but it also helped me to figure out who I am and live my authentic self through trial and error in these social spaces. I mean, they were largely bars. It was largely an alcohol drinking scene. um, I also was finding that like I was still feeling like the odd person out a lot of the time, but that was okay because I was feeling through it. I was finding my footing, and and my relationship with my spouse evolved in this period and got better because I was coming to it from a more authentic, strong place. Um, they were also doing their coming out journey, and as they were coming out, we were really finding that it was interesting to see how that impacted people around us. Um, a lot of my friends treated me differently as a mom. They the people I thought were my friends, um, would before I was a mother, especially my makeout buddy friends, they viewed me differently when I was a parent, and they um, they were much less interested in hanging out with me when I had free time, and so I had to go find new friends, and that was empowering. It really helped me be more authentically me, to push into that scary space. And this is another example where the right choice was the scary choice. The right choice was the choice that terrified me, and where it would trigger me, and then I'd have the day of depression, and then I'd have to pick myself up and get myself going again, um, because that led to me being braver and stronger and more independent and more of my inner light shining through. Um, Another thing was happening to me professionally around this time where um, I was being pushed into leadership tracks. I was being pushed into tracks where they wanted me to do the corporate thing. They wanted me to do the women's leadership conferences and work on climbing the corporate scale in the big company. And that was feeling bad to me. I didn't want to live that life. I wanted to live a different life. And so I was finding myself kind of pushing against that, but really having this interplay of like, I was this crazy power, have it all working professional, and working professional mother, going out to play a bunch of pinball, like going to Burning Man, living this have it all kind of life. And I built a reputation for myself around that, which was crazy. And what I found is that like every time I'd push and some and like feel like things were going to go off the rails, they didn't go off the rails. It got better. And this is around the same time that my therapist says to me, Leela, you should make some mistakes. And I was like, well, I suppose I could make some small mistakes. Like, and my therapist was like, or were some big ones. And so I started just doing experiments to push the boundaries, doing experiments to push my edges and just see. Like, um, and keep in mind, I had some agreement with my spouse about some of this stuff. So this was around the time when I was like, well, what if I do just make out with that hot guy at pinball? And you know, obviously, like my spouse knew what I was doing, but I and just see how that feels. What if I do go to Burning Man by myself while I have an 18-month-old baby at home? See how that feels. Um, Parenting also for me has always been something where we take very equal roles in childbearing and caregiving. So that freed me up in ways that a lot of women don't have to really come into my own and to have that experience of really finding so much freedom as a mother, like separate from my identity as a mother, but at the same time, it was just beautiful and really empowering to be able to be all of those things together. And so, experiment, try, push, see what happens, retool, next experiment. Um, we were having house parties around this time where my spouse was also starting to come out to friends. Um, Really embracing also being feminine around our kids when they were in elementary school, like preschool, elementary school ages. And so that journey was very collaborative. Also, around this time, I found myself having to come out as bisexual so many times. And it was so very frustrating that I just became a bit militant about it and realized that I really wanted to be open about things. Um, so that's where we were leading up to COVID. And then, and it's, I'm very, very grateful for those years. And I really appreciate a lot of the connections that I built in that time. And some of those people are my very best friends. But most importantly, it was a training ground for me. It was a time when my family of origin was behind me, still painful, still there, but behind me. And I could really push and follow that advice from my therapist to make mistakes. And that allowed me to really feel my safety. And feeling my safety has allowed me to open up more authentically and to be more shameless in so many ways. Because, Maslow's hierarchy of needs is basic, beautiful philosophy. We have to have our foundational needs met. If you don't have food, water, shelter, then you cannot explore any of your higher needs. If you are constantly dealing with like ongoing trauma triggers, ongoing insecurities, ongoing like assaults of that nature, then it's very, very difficult to progress beyond in any kind of way. But looking at that security, having that security and really being able to embrace that fully allowed me to take risks with myself, to take risks in my life and in my friendships and in my experiences that I did not feel secure enough to do before that. And I am forever grateful for that. It changed me, and for the better, so much. And then COVID. And then COVID happened. Oh my goodness. So COVID changed the world in so many ways, so many ways. But for me and my family, during the period I was just talking about where I was coming to grow into myself, there was this sense of dissatisfaction that was niggling at me, that was just stuck there, that I was very open about with my spouse, with folks, about just, I feel like something's missing. I knew that something that was missing had something to do with this desire to make out with all my friends. But I couldn't really put a finger on it. And I should say that up to that point in my life, I had not seen a healthy example of a polyamorous relationship. I think that a lot of my opinions about that at the time were colored by what I'd seen in the late 90s and early aughts with some pretty toxic examples of polyamory, and really situations where it was relationships that had a lot of rules and controls. One thing that I remember vividly saying to a friend was, oh my God, polyamory sounds so horrible. The last thing I wanted is to have multiple partners who get to have control over me. And that was how I had viewed it up to that point. So, here comes COVID. And at this point, my spouse is more and more out all the time. And I was just having this feeling that was like, but what about me? What about me? Why do I still have to be in this cage? And and my marriage was feeling more and more like a cage to me. It was feeling like something I had to do, and I wanted to be there. I love my spouse, and I would not change a single thing about that. But it wasn't enough, and that was really becoming clear to me that there was something missing that was only coming out in those moments of sexual freedom and in those Burning Man moments, and I needed it. So, trapped at home. I was also an essential worker, but the kind of essential worker where I was working 50 to 60 hours a week from my desk in the basement hallway. So, and then my kids are so amazing, and it was such a wonderful experience. But it was tough. It was tough, and so we would continue to have friends over to the backyard, but it was limited, and all of that social outlet was just curtailed. So, I got really really drunk one New Year's, and ended up having sex with the friend who came over, and I barely remember it. The next morning I was messaging with them while like figuring out with V what had happened. My wife thought it had happened the night before, and that nearly blew up my marriage. And it at the time it really brought to a head this sense that I had. It was like, I have not lied to you at all. I have done nothing dishonest. You knew exactly about all of my feelings. Yeah, the thing I did wrong was I got really drunk. That was the thing I did wrong. I should not have gotten really drunk. But I had barely had alcohol for a long, long time because it's been COVID, and then nice bottle of whiskey. I messed up. And but in my mind, I had not betrayed my relationship. In my spouse's mind, I had. And I felt really shitty, but I also felt like I couldn't go back. Something had to be different. I couldn't go back. It was one of those crisis points where sometimes the crisis happens because you need it to. And sometimes if you're not willing to go there, your brain will just kind of make you. And that's what I feel like happened there. I needed this step, and I had needed it for a long time, but I was afraid to take it. And part of me just got so overwhelmed by the situation that I just made it happen. And you know what? Really, 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 really glad it did, because we went to couples counseling. We had a therapist who said, "Hey, Leela, you're poly. It's how you were made," and got me started on really understanding what polyamory is and what being a proud slut is, and started reading all the books and the ethical slut and going down that rabbit hole. Also, that same therapist really helped my spouse with a lot of their feelings of shame, and realizing the degree to which our relationship, despite us not intending it to be that way, was mired in these ideas of heteronormativity and religion that we had not even realized was there. We hadn't even realized that we were like operating under these constraints, but there were so many constraints. And so we started peeling back the onion together, really untangling our individual stuff, but also our collective stuff, and started the journey of re-exploring our relationship to each other under the understanding of our queerness and polyness, and then later, after getting into it, my kinkiness, really finding all of that. So taking this through back to the through line. So I started from a place of so much abuse and insecurity, and relationships, especially romantic ones, were my lifeline that helped me heal. My marriage was my anchor that let me let go of all of those abusive people in my life. And here I was, risking my marriage, risking my foundation of security, and looking in the face, staring in the face, that I was going to be okay. I was safe, truly, truly safe, in the middle of a pandemic, but so safe that if my marriage ended, I would still be okay. I would still be safe. Life changing. Life changing. I took a big risk and I made a big mistake. And I found out that I was safe. Safe, truly safe. That opened my world. It was like a graduation. And then from there, it's been the icing on the cake. That change allowed my spouse and I to we relocated and changed up our friend groups, kept the people in our lives who were really valuable and let go of the other ones. Moved to the place where what we most wanted was to have our family be, to have it be okay to be abnormal and to be in a place where that would be as accepted as possible and where authenticity is truly valued. So we moved to Portland, Oregon, and to a specific neighborhood in Portland that is known for being very queer, very poly-friendly, where it's just okay to have a queer family. And no, we're not like everybody else, but everybody else is who they are and what they are. And that's at least a part of the cultural value here in a way we haven't found anywhere else. And I've been doing experiments with my kink to really dig out those really, really terrifying repressed memories and PTSD things from a foundation of knowing that I am safe, truly, truly safe. And even these videos, like the openness of really just putting out there into the world who I am and what my backstory is and what I think about things, because I have that security. So in that foundation of needs, that's met now. And that has really helped me live even more authentically. In a lot of ways, my journey has been establish safety, experiment and push. Establish more safety, experiment and push. And that's one of the keys to how I've been able to live my most authentic life, is that I just take care of the foundation first. Take care of the foundation first and do the hard things. Take care of the foundation, do the hard and painful things, and good professional help. Because I had a serious mental health condition. I still do. My post-traumatic stress disorder, especially the kind of complex PTSD that I have, it's a major serious condition. And trying to push through something like that without professional help is like trying to live with diabetes without ever going to the doctor. I mean, sure, it can kind of be done, but you're probably shortening your life to do it. And it's not going to be nearly as good as if you actually get the treatment that you need. So yeah, I mean, it's been a long journey, but it's also been so rewarding. And I'm so grateful for the opportunities that I've had and the strength of will that I found to push through and do it. So this brings us to the close of the first of these long form bonus episodes. A few closing thoughts. When folks ask me how I live an authentic, brave life, an off the cuff answer I gave at One Burning Man is still so very true. Work your ass off and get good therapy. It takes a lot of hard work to be authentic because you have to be self-aware and peeling away and going to the hard places. You have to go to the hard places. In my experience, that's the only way. Other people might have their own way, but in my experience, that is the only way. You have to be willing to face your darkness and go through it. I love the quote from Frank Herbert's Dune, which, to paraphrase it, is I must not fear. Well, I mean, you can fear, but I kind of dislike that line. But like, fear is the mind killer. Fear literally will shut down your vocal processing centers, your ability to think and ration clearly. It literally will depress your brain. Fear is the little death that brings obliteration. Fear will drive you into disassociation. Fear will drive you into a little death of blackness, of blanking, of not being able to function, of freezing, of fawning. So fear is the little death that brings obliteration. I will face my fear. I will let it pass over and through me. So I will look my fear in the eye and I will say, this is in me. It goes all through me, all through me, all through me. It inhabits all of me. I am my fear. I will let it pass over and through me. And where the fear has gone, or when the fear has gone, so when I've been embodied in that fear, when I've bathed in, soaked in that fear, I let it pass over and through me. And when the fear is gone, there will be nothing. Only I, that inner sense of I, that core sense of who I am. Only I will remain. That's how I do it. That's how I live authentically. That's how I find my authenticity. I face my fear and I live my pain, and then I let it go, and then I'm left. Then what's left is me with good therapy. Good therapy and security. You can only do that. You can only do that if your foundational needs of security are met. If you have food, water, shelter, and emotional safety. Those are the tools that make it possible. So, on that note, I will leave you. This is Leela, the proud poly kinky queer slut. I hope you've enjoyed this long form episode. And please remember, you can ask me anything. Thank you very much and have a great day.